Hello, everyone. My name is Matthew Lin. I am a data research analyst with RDC, and I will be talking about the diversification and globalization of the cannabis industry. First, I'm going to hit diversification, examining things such as regulations, current product categories, and upcoming product categories. And then I'll dive into globalization, talking about which regions are considered to be the most promising markets for cannabis, as well as looking at cannabis legislation in major regions and countries. So, by diversification, what I'm mainly talking about is the creation of new products in various product categories that might contain cannabis in some way, be it tetrahydrocannabinol, aka THC, or cannabidiol, aka CBD. Before I jump into that, though, I do want to touch on the issues already facing the financial industry and how diversification can exacerbate them. So, financial institutions already have to worry about things like the disconnect between federal and state laws for both marijuana and hemp. They have to worry about their anti money laundering programs and their compliance with the Bank Secrecy Act. And they have to deal with the complex supply chain depicted in the image shown here. It's a lot. The diversification of the cannabis market will only amplify the confusion, adding all sorts of new entries into probably every level of the supply chain. So, as this market continues to grow and diversify, scrutiny on due diligence programs will only increase, and it is imperative to keep up. In states like California, where the diversification movement is particularly strong, marijuana related businesses are looking at a different kind of supply chain than the one previously depicted, taking into account things like different state licensing restrictions and the wider range of products. Other companies like Aurora, one of the bigger companies, cannabis companies in the country, are getting ready for the seemingly inevitable boom of the cannabis market. They're investing in various things all across the entire supply chain, spreading out the risk and increasing their future profitability. So, the bulk of cannabis products that you might find now are infused with CBD. CBD is commonly derived from hemp, which is high in CBD oil and low in THC. With the legalization of hemp in the 2018 Farm Bill, there was effectively a green light to start making products with CBD. But what makes CBD so appealing? For one, it's non psychoactive, but it is also believed to have a variety of health benefits, such as providing pain relief. It's supposed to help with anxiety, it's an antidepressant, and is even considered to help mitigate negative side effects of cancer treatment. More research is actively being done to determine future benefits as well. However, in November of 2019, the FDA released a formal warning about advertising the health benefits of CBD. This was in response to the influx of CBD products online and in stores. CBD is not yet approved as a safe product by the FDA. They called on states to provide more research support into the benefits, proper doses, and possible dangers of using it. And the warning has certainly thrown some cold water on what was quickly becoming a hot product. And as a result, we can expect the market to grow more slowly than it initially appeared that it would. Lower profile companies might not be too worried about the warning, but it is likely to keep some of the more high profile and influential companies away from jumping in on CBD just yet. That said, the FDA is not completely immovable on CBD, as they have already approved some medications, such as Epidiolex. These medications are prescription only, however. But as you can see from this graph, the outlook for CBD is still very promising, and it is expected to reach the multi-billion-dollar territory before long. So despite the FDA's warnings, CBD products can still be found in brick and mortar stores as well as online. Stores such as Walgreens, CVS, and Rite Aid carry products across a collective over 2,500 locations, predominantly in states such as Colorado and Washington, where cannabis laws are most relaxed. The most common types of products you would find in these stores are topicals, sprays, patches, and oils. There are all sorts of product categories that have been linked to cannabis and or are expected to be linked to cannabis. For one, cannabis beers are already available in states like California, with Heineken's subsidiary Lagunitas releasing the popular Hi-Fi Hops line. It is important to note that while it is considered to be beer, cannabis beers are really only like a traditional beer in style and taste. If they contain any alcohol at all, it's something minor like 0.5% ABV. It may be hard to read on that picture, but there are two varieties of the Lagunitas depicted. The one on the left contains 5 milligrams CBD and 5 milligrams THC, and the one on the right is only THC, and that's 10 milligrams. So, with the recent struggles of the beer industry, we can safely assume that it will be one of the major markets for cannabis infusion moving forward. For other alcoholic products, there are some legislative roadblocks. For example, in California, there is a prohibition on products containing both high amounts of alcohol and high amounts of THC. Regardless, there is still extensive research being done by the wine industry in particular, to explore how they could work CBD into their products. Other product categories include snacks. Edibles are already a well-known product in the cannabis industry, but we can expect further expansion and diversification in that regard. Surveys done to gauge public interest in cannabis products revealed that snacks generate the most excitement. It's possible to find THC-laced coffee online, and some coffee shops in Colorado, for example, are using CBD oil in their coffee grounds and serving that in store. Dog treats are another category that's seeing some movement. These would certainly not include THC, but CBD-infused treats are said to work well in calming an excitable pet. And the last that I'll mention is supplements, particularly things like sleep aids containing CBD. And this is certainly not an exhaustive list of product categories coming up, but it is just a few that I've seen the most discussion on. So, how exactly does this diversification create risk for banks and other financial institutions? In general, as the products diversify, so too do the companies providing, selling, and manufacturing them. This means that there will be constant acquisitions and consolidations of local and state established marijuana businesses. This movement also necessitates more emphasis on continual monitoring of legislation and regulatory guidance across local, state, national, and global jurisdictions. Diversification will also make it much more difficult for the financial industry to identify what is a marijuana related business. As it stands now, it's not too difficult to figure out that a company in Anchorage, Alaska called Dankerage is related to marijuana. But Anheuser-Busch and Scott's Miracle Grow recently have been included as cannabis stocks to watch. That makes it a little bit trickier. The inevitable growth and evolution of the supply chain will have a significant impact on anti-money laundering and know your customer regulatory scrutiny. And even further, this increased diversification is coinciding with the spread of cannabis across the globe. It is critical now more than ever for globally operating banks to ensure that they have a thorough due diligence program. So I'm going to move on now to globalization, looking at the potential markets for cannabis in other regions and the status of cannabis legislation in them. So real quick, a little bit on globalization versus diversification. It is interesting to consider whether the diversification of cannabis drives globalization or vice versa. In places like Europe, where medical marijuana is widely accepted, it's possible that the upcoming broader spectrum of CBD related products with their apparent health benefits may be generating a louder discussion on cannabis as a whole. But in any case, the inherent complexity and interconnectivity of globalization, especially when paired with the diversification of products, adds yet another layer to the regulatory challenges in the cannabis industry. So, an expert analysis came up with this graph projecting the regions that will have the biggest cannabis markets in the future. Note that Europe is actually rated higher than North America, despite having much more stringent cannabis laws overall. I'll be examining each region in descending order, looking at the most notable countries and legislative movements. So, starting with Europe, generally there has been a movement towards decriminalization of marijuana and legalization of medical marijuana. Notably, Luxembourg has explicitly vowed to fully legalize all use of marijuana before the end of their current administration, so it is a safe bet that they will be the first to legalize in Europe. While Luxembourg should be acknowledged for their commitment to legalization, it's unlikely that legalization in Luxembourg would have much of an influence on Europe as a whole. Because of organizations like NATO, the nature of Europe is such that the true powerhouse countries, Spain, Germany, France, Italy, the UK, have significant influence over their smaller neighbors. So for those, Spain has not yet formally legalized, but they effectively have. There's a well established weed culture there, and they could certainly be the first European powerhouse to legalize. Germany has legalized medicinal and is very lax towards possession of small amounts of marijuana. France is expected to legalize medical marijuana soon, and President Emmanuel Macron has verbalized support for a much more relaxed cannabis law. Italy has very strong public support for cannabis, and they already have a cannabis light program. The low potency recreational cannabis that allows has been described as decaf marijuana, but it is still a very popular program. And the UK has legalized medical, and their usage of recreational cannabis is very high, but they are moving slowly legislatively. So, of those five, Spain and Italy look to be the closest, but it wouldn't be surprising to see all five be fully legalized within 5 or 6 years, maybe even quicker, depending on how much they are influenced by the first of them to break the seal. Scandinavia as a whole has much more stringent laws than the rest of Europe, though Norway is exploring decriminalization and has strong harm reduction policies in effect. And there are also multiple civil society movements springing up around the region pushing for lighter policies. And then Russia, they are still fully illegal, but they are fairly lenient on offenders with small amounts of marijuana in their possession. Moving on to Asia, Asia is much more restrictive overall, particularly in the Middle Eastern Asian countries, Japan, and the Philippines, though they do allow hemp. China is extremely harsh on marijuana and THC in general, but they are one of the biggest players in the world when it comes to hemp and CBD. And there are a few countries that are more supportive, like Thailand and South Korea, and they support medicinal use. Then India has a very relaxed stance on cannabis. In some regions, it's functionally fully legalized. However, there is no formal legislation. Their relaxed stance has resulted in a lack of discussion on the topic, and the central government is not prioritizing cannabis legislation. So until some of the higher priority issues they're facing are resolved, there likely won't be any legislative movement. Overall, it's safe to say that Asia is a long way off from recreational legalization, and Europe will no doubt beat them there. That said, it is possible that a broader movement in Europe and elsewhere could generate more of a fruitful discussion in Asia. For Latin America and the Caribbean, Mexico is going to legalize very soon. They nearly did so in the fall, but there were some legislative delays that led to an April 30th deadline to legalize. However, the COVID-19 outbreak has stalled their Senate, so we won't see the official legislation until the Senate resumes. Colombia, Peru, Argentina, Ecuador, and Venezuela have legalized medical and have each decriminalized recreational use to varying degrees. Each of them could certainly fully legalize within the next 3 to 5 years. And then Uruguay has already legalized recreational marijuana, and it's been a very popular policy. Brazil is unlikely to legalize recreational use soon. They support medicinal and industrial use of cannabis, but President Jair Bolsonaro is very opposed to recreational marijuana legalization and would be more likely to make Brazil more restrictive than he would be to make it more relaxed. Then the Caribbean region, due to its economic ties, is expected to emulate whatever is done in the United States. The CARICOM Commission, CARICOM meaning Caribbean Community, generally supports legalizing cannabis, but wants to ensure that the industry is regulated in a similar way to alcohol. For Oceania, New Zealand recently legalized medicinal marijuana, and they are planning to have a referendum in 2020. The referendum will be non-binding, but it will formally document public support for fully legalized cannabis, for which the support is expected to be very high. So provided that goes as expected, full legalization could follow soon after. Australia is in a similar boat. They have also recently legalized medicinal marijuana, and the public is largely in support of marijuana use and legalization. However, their next move is more fixed on decriminalization. In Africa, there may not yet be any formal legalization, but usage is extremely high across the continent. Many countries like Ghana are essentially fully legalized because enforcement of legal violations is rare. South Africa appears to be the closest to full legalization. Their courts have already ruled in favor of private use and cultivation, so expect the federal government to take action soon. Sierra Leone, Ghana, Zimbabwe, and Lesotho are also considered by experts as likely to legalize soon. But what makes Africa a little more unique as a region is that their debate isn't so much focused on civil rights or medicinal benefits like it is in Europe. It's more focused on the economic opportunity presented. Thus, the spread of more relaxed cannabis laws might play out a little bit differently. It's entirely possible that once one country legalizes cannabis and starts to make a good profit on it, many other countries will quickly follow suit and cash in. Then there's Antarctica, where there's no real governing body and no real restrictions, so you can go nuts there. But anyway, globalization is closer than you think. With Mexico's legalization coming up and Canada already being there, cannabis is on our borders right now. Add in the inevitable expansion into Europe and elsewhere overseas, and it is clear that financial institutions must be looking at marijuana-related businesses all over the globe or risk running afoul of U.S. money laundering regulations. To that end, RDC's coverage looks well beyond the US, with global coverage including Canada, Spain, and Uruguay. So here on the left, you can see an example of one of RDC's profiles for a US marijuana-related business. It includes things like the registered name, any aliases, all addresses, the type of business, license numbers, and so on. Basically, whatever information is available, we're going to get it. Then in the smaller box on the right, There's an example of some of our overseas coverage. So this one is a cannabis social club in Spain. These are designated places where people can smoke marijuana freely despite it not being formally legalized. And it's the same situation, just grabbing whatever information is available to us. So beyond covering lists of marijuana related businesses, RDC's database also draws from adverse media, politically exposed persons list, as well as sanctions and watch lists. The result is the most comprehensive view for mitigating regulatory, operational, and reputational risk. And a result of those supplemental data sources, on the right here, you can see an example of a marijuana related business profile that also includes risk codes for things like regulatory action and fraud. So, to add a few concluding thoughts, between diversification and globalization, we are going to see more products and more countries break into the cannabis market, and that will create more risk. More cannabis products, particularly those infused with CBD, will be showing up in stores before long and will impact and further complicate the entire supply chain. Keep an eye on Europe specifically as the next cannabis hotspot. With a huge projected market and increasingly positive sentiment towards cannabis, it's likely the next frontier. The powerhouse countries will guide the way. We shouldn't ignore the role that intergovernmental organizations like the UN could play. While the UN has not yet supported cannabis legalization, its leadership is getting more progressive. So if the UN were to shift and take a pro cannabis stance, that could send shockwaves across the globe. And last, interconnectivity. These two phenomena in the cannabis industry are happening simultaneously and are intertwined. Globalization isn't just countries legalizing, it's companies expanding around the globe and diversifying their products and types of businesses. Diversification may be being fed by the general popularization of cannabis, but it's also by global cannabis companies consolidating and merging so that they can dominate multiple sectors. In sum, this is an evolving market and an evolving conversation. RDC will be monitoring all developments closely and will be ready to gather and digest data as it becomes available. By working closely with banks and financial institutions all over the world, we will be able to execute proper due diligence and mitigate risk. Right, we good?